The Food and Agriculture Organization strongly projects that Nigeria's efforts to achieve zero hunger by 2030 are being seriously undermined. How can the federal and state governments heed the warning of implement solutions to the impending specter of food shortage in Nigeria? And we have in the studio to look at this Nkiru Okparike. She is the CEO and Envirogrow Farms. It's good to have you, Nkiru.
Thank you very much.
And sitting next to her, we have Mrs. Folunshaw, I beg your pardon, Olania. She's the Programs Director, Agro Innovative Africa. It's good to have you join us.
My pleasure.
And the gentleman, he is the MD, Farmgate Africa, Mr. Kenneth Obiajulu. It's good to have you in the studio.
Good evening, gentlemen and ladies. Now, let's kick off conversation across the 36 states of the Federation. Not all states. We'll be having elections in less than 24 hours. But let's start. We know agriculture is supposed to be the mainstay, but let's start with you. What do you necessarily make of greenhouse farming, and how feasible can we incorporate this into the agricultural plan for the next 4 years?
All right, I run a greenhouse farm in Lagos. The thing greenhouse farming is that it gives you a competitive advantage in that you can produce all year round. But you have to make sure that the cost-benefit analysis works. Not everything needs to be produced in a greenhouse farm. And there's something we'll have advantage of. We'll have cheap labor. So sometimes it's actually better to use the cheap labor we'll have to farm than to go into greenhouse farming, because there are lots of things that involve the technology, the special chemicals and things to support it, and actually the services to support it. So yes, I will always champion greenhouse farming, but you have to do a cost-benefit analysis and find out if it works for what you want to do and also where you want to set it up.
Realistically, looking at Nigeria's economy, and you're saying you have to look at the cost analysis. Realistically, what's the percentage of Nigerians who can go into greenhouse farming as we speak? And he gave us a 4-year, term plan. How realistic?
Less than 5% because of the prohibitive cost of the setup. The greenhouses are all imported. Everything you use is imported, and because of the fluctuating dollar, sometimes it doesn't make. It's not the best decision for you. But there's something we'll have excess of land, and we'll have cheap labor. For sometimes it's actually better to start with that. There's some specialized product that you must have to grow in a greenhouse farm. So that's why I say the cost-benefit analysis comes in. For those specialized products, yes, you have to use a greenhouse. But for others that are not so specialized, which will have skill setting, we can use regular open field and grow them. But less than 5% can actually afford the cost of setting up a greenhouse farm.
Now, Felicia, across the 36 states of the Federation now, we have areas of comparative advantages when we're looking at crops and livestock that we could actually have and benefit from those areas. Now, what sort of vision should we be having this time around, and what would you expect from the next Minister of Agriculture? He initially said we should be able to reach 8, 9, 10,000 metric tons of having rice production, but we've not necessarily seen a whole lot of development in that area. Using rice as a case study, but we know we have shea butter, we have cocoa, we have a whole lot more. What should we be doing?
I think we should take stock of what we've done in the past few years to find out exactly where we actually are. When this is done with some R&D, we have real facts of what we've been able to achieve in each state based on our projections, what the gaps are, and what we need to do to actually get to where we planned to be. So another thing that should be done this time around is there should be an agricultural plan that should actually state, once we've identified with R&D what the gaps are, how we hope to achieve those targets between now and the next 4 years.
Now, quickly, Kenneth, implementing research and development, how feasible can we necessarily have this? Yes, we are supposed to learn from past mistakes, but we don't necessarily see any growth so far. So in the next 4 years, do you think we'll see any active implementation of all of the research that we've had so far?
So I think one of the biggest challenges that even Nigeria as a whole has is implementation of research recommendations. Nigeria is a country that is blessed with so much resources, and so many international development agencies have done so much work and have made several recommendations on how we can move forward from where we are. But in terms of implementation, it has always been a big problem. I think one of the things that the government can do is to look at one of the things that have been recommended is, can our states focus on their areas of core comparative advantages? You know, for example, we know that a state like Benue produces rice and produces yam in abundance. Can they focus on that as their areas of core advantage? Kaduna is one of the biggest producers of ginger in the world, right? Can they focus on just cultivating ginger, and then we amass enough support to ensure that they do what they know how to do best? So there are so many of such recommendations, so many of such researches that have been conducted by so many organizations, and it's about how does the government put their acts together in ensuring that.
But do you think our local farmers understand the language of pricing and production, just moving away from research and development?
Okay, so our farmers, back in, let's say about 5 years
At least to
back,
make it more lucrative or attractive to the eye, and then government can now say, well, we'll pump a little more investment in that area.
So our farmers, basically one of the biggest challenges also that of information, access to information. Our farmers are beginning to get the wind of how the market works, and they understand the plus and minus of agriculture. It's about how do they create, we have 4 big challenges that they need to always solve when it comes to agriculture, and that's what is really the biggest challenge. The first, we're looking at productivity issues. How do they solve the low productivity that they face in their farms? They have post-harvest losses that they need to deal with. Typical case in point, tomato, 45 to about 60% of tomatoes is lost post-harvest. You know, access to finance. Our financial institutions are asking smallholder farmers that barely have enough to feed themselves to give them collateral of 150% cover to ensure that they can get loans from the banks. If they had such collaterals, they would be cultivating rather than going for finance. And the last thing is market linkages. You know, how do they link what they have produced, what they know how to do, to superior markets without parting with enough benefits to the intermediaries in that space? So those are some of the challenges that they face, and not necessarily about the plus and minus.
Let's talk about Akinwumi Adesina. He did say something in 2017 when he resumed as the president of the Africa Development Bank. He did say something about the fact that we need more investment in rural infrastructure to boost agriculture. This is almost 3 years ago. And let me just quote him. He said, "We must continue to run public policies that get access to seeds and fertilizers for farmers at scale." When I mean scale, he says, I mean at scale of millions and millions of farmers. And we're in 2019. This is not being done. The average farmer, I was talking to the governor of Kaduna State, and he was talking about the fact that he meets his farmers halfway. They've partnered with India and some Indian companies and some people to, you know, boost the economy and the agricultural sector. They talked about poultry. But I said, how many people have access to this grand gesture that the government is putting across? Because they're bottlenecks. They're people who really genuinely need these things, but they never get access because of the bureaucracies that are there. So how do we reduce the problem? Because he talked about productivity. If we get more of these seeds and seedlings, we can get higher productivity, right?
Yes, I mean, it's very possible, and it's great to bring in the case of Kaduna into play. They have one of the most robust agricultural systems and frameworks in Nigeria, where the farmers and the state governments have a cordial relationship. And they have been able to build one of the proper business cases that most of the states are beginning to follow through on. As regards seeds and fertilizer implementations, the government has also seen that government should not necessarily be in the business of making provisions for seeds and fertilizers. These are privately run initiatives that would have effective results. And we're beginning to see most private organizations, big multinational corporations, covering this gap. And when in the last administration, I think when Akinwumi was the minister, they ran a program on fertilizers that was almost not as effective as it is today. You know, the rate at which farmers have access to fertilizers from private sector routes to markets are more effective. You know, so the government should focus on creating a regulatory framework that allows for private sector businesses to run all of those activities, as against you know they themselves playing such.
Let me come to you. We see that there are lots of changes in the agricultural sector. It's gone beyond the hoe and the machete. It's gone to mechanized farming and even the ICT part of it. But then we still see, when it comes down to it, there are lots of people who studied or some who don't even study. I mean, I've met some guy who's called Young Rich Farmer, some famous guy in Nigeria. And he said he didn't start out as a farmer. How do we make the agricultural sector more comely, more interesting, not just for investments, but for young people to get involved in, because we seem to leave it to the people in the rural areas. And it's really beautiful to see people like you, sit in the studio looking this good, who are interested in agriculture. How do we make it more comely for the people who are coming, the young people who are looking at you? Madam.
Well, I think the first thing is we should make agriculture trendier. A lot of young people latch onto the social media, and there's a lot of information that can be passed on via the social media. What I've realized is that even if you look at research results, R&Ds, only 2% of Nigerian farmers adopt the new varieties of seeds. And it's not because they don't want to, but they don't have access to the information. So it's about sensitization, it's about educating the farmers, communication and passing the information on. And then the communication plan to reach out to both the youth and the farmers who are not very young is for the government to effectively develop a communication strategy specifically to educate farmers and potential farmers, youth that they want to adopt farming. I think it's important for this information to go out, because a lot of people walk up to you once they know you're in the agric space and they're like, I have questions. There's so many things I want to talk about. Where can we get the information? Government has done a bit in the sense that there are ADPs, agric projects, offices where you can go to. But how accessible are these people? The stage we are in Africa is such that from the touch of a button, you should be able to ask questions on areas that are great to you and then get information back on how you can solve your problems. Young people don't have the patience to go and queue up in an agric office. They want to have access to data real time. So I think incoming governments should look at how they can make, agriculture and agribusiness information available. You don't have to wait to have a workshop to pass information around. Workshops would reach the farmers in the rural areas where you can have workshops in the different local languages so that, they adopt what you're saying, they believe you because they understand the message you're passing on. But what else you need to do for the young people is to have information readily available to them, so that like you go online and you go to Ask Jeeves when you need information. I think the government should synchronize all the data they have on developing different value chains and making that website available to the young people, so that, without even talking to anybody, just like a lot of young people go online to find out information on medicine, if they feel funny, they go there to look for information. We should have all the data, information in agriculture synchronized so that at the touch of a button, these young people can get the information. You'll be amazed at how many of them will opt into agriculture.
Can I add something to
quickly.
that? As you said, social media is very big for the young people. So imagine one of these telecoms company taking a young farmer doing well and putting him as a brand ambassador. This is our day. This is the car he drives. Do you know what he does?
Yeah.
Don't say anything. Next week you say, Ade is a farmer. That's all you need to say. And everybody will want to be a farmer, because if Ade can do this and drive this car and live this life, then it's not as bad as we think. Something so simple.
Okay, now, Nkiru, also weighing on this, now we know value addition is highly important when we are talking about agriculture, but how then at the different state levels do we improve on this process beyond just producing the raw materials, because the raw products, because even when we produce them, the bulk of them are used. We don't even do enough to get exported. We don't have enough to even feed ourselves. So how then do we start building structures across the different states, and then we can now say, well, we have value addition, we process, and we have byproducts from these?
Just the way they have in foreign countries. What they have is that you have a big farmer working with a manufacturing company, and then you set up cluster farms around them. So it's not government, really, because many times the government spends money, they will spend money and buy a big mill, and nobody uses it. They set up a factory, and nobody comes to it. You have to work with the private sector. So you come to an area where there's a private sector person already operating in a big place, then you now try to support him to set up or work with the cluster farmers around there to supply him to supply the manufacturing companies or people who are processing it. Yes, a lot of money and lots of products are being wasted in primary production. We need to move to the next level of processing it a bit before we export, or processing it a bit before we sell it. But it's not the government that's supposed to do that. Instead, government is supposed to create support. They're ready for practically every state you go to, or practically every product you have. There's already a big player in it. Is to support the big player to work with the smaller farmers to supply the processing factories.
Felicia, power now comes into question, where you're talking about providing the enabling environment, having the right support and processing. There's no how you can do all of these without power. What should we be doing this time around?
Well, we should look a lot into the solar space, solar energy space, because that, I think, is extremely dependable. Government should focus on increasing the supply of power, but in the agric sector, because, you know, once you miss 1-2 hours in that cycle, you really cannot go back. You have fixed planting seasons, and once you harvest, you need to process. So I think government should look at how we can set up separate infrastructure focused on the agric space. Solar is an example, and green energy is something else we can also look at, so that agric is taken care of from a separate power grid. Otherwise, if we are going to continue to depend on the national one, there may be some times when we lose real opportunity in processing and getting food. People eat every day. So you can't come and tell me that, you know, you ran out of power for 3-4 days, you couldn't produce. For that reason, I shouldn't give milk to my child. So anything that has to do with food should be given priority. Even if they are going to be rationing, rationing should be done on the scale of food first, or food processing companies first, and then others. Because really, food is life.
Let's talk about standards here, because, you know, I remember, I think last year, Aldogbe was talking about us exporting yams. And I know that Nigerian beans has been rejected severally because of the way we preserve it, the preservatives. And countries like the UK are very, very strict when it comes to what you bring into their country. What steps should we be taking? Because we're all very excited about exporting. We're exporting crayfish, we're exporting all sorts of things. What should we be doing in observing those standards to make sure that nobody turns our goods back? I mean, packaging, branding, these are all parts of agriculture. This is the business angle, actually, of agriculture, which people don't pay so much attention to. Why are we always making mistakes in that direction, standards?
So I can speak to the case of standards and the international community. The truth is there are codes and there are requirements that we should be able to meet. And case in point, the yam export that was done sometime in 2017. Also, the media didn't also do us enough justice, because we are aware that 2 batches of consignments left Nigeria, and 1 got to the US. And before it got to the port of Texas, it was sold completely with less than 10% spoilage. There was another Nigerian that went through the back and exported to the UK. There is a standard that you must follow with.
For every country?
For every country. For example, the yams were purchased from Zakibem in Benue State, one of the biggest yam producing communities. You move the yams in a cold storage facility to the ports. When it gets to the ports, they are wrapped, they are waxed. You cut the two edges of the yam so they don't grow. And then you transport them in refrigerated reefers, cold chain, before it gets to the port of destination. And you must meet the quarantine department's requirements in Nigeria. You must meet with all the standards that have been set. People have exported yams, and our ginger is one of the best in the world. About 95% of our ginger is exported to the international market. And a lot of them don't come back. I think one of the challenges is, even we as Nigerians, sometimes we're so used to cutting corners. I want to make some more gains. Can we go through this route? I think in terms of setting standards, one of the biggest standards for commodities has to be the moisture content. You know, a lot of our farmers are knowledgeable about all of these things. The question is, how do we consolidate on all of these gains and communicate properly what is going on in these spaces? But in terms of setting standards that I'm aware of, we have reasonably met some of them.
Felicia, he talked about the means of transportation or exporting of these. Now, within our local geographical setting, across Nigeria, the post-harvest losses are heightened by the poor roads that we have across the country. But now, what level of integrated means of transportation, using rail, using road, using water transport, do you expect this time around synergies between states and ensuring that we have this powerhouse called agriculture and utilize it?
Right. What I would be happy to see is the network between regions, and this network being fully utilized to get produce faster and in better condition to the other regions, across the regions. For example, the rail network is being worked on, but when and how it will be connected in such a way that you can move straight from your farm gate right to your next location where you want it to get to is something else. The rail system we have now, I think, is such that you use it both for cargo and human beings. So they're both competing for space. So until that time when we can get dedicated lines, logistics, solely for produce, and then that way the farmers know that because their products need to get faster and in better condition to different locations, so that you are not going to a rail station, human beings are queuing to get on the same train, and then your produce are there. Tomatoes can't.
I mean, I hear on Saturday you had even rams on the train.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, but you see, for example, if the cabin is already 70% full with human, they are competing. So the issue is there a way we can have dedicated logistics to food? Because by the time you cross-load, really, contamination could also happen. So for us to have our goods get to the right place in the right, because once you certify them good out of your farm and then they get contaminated on the way,
In transit, yeah.
there's an issue. So we shouldn't just do things without standards. Let us have dedicated logistics for food, because food security also implies that, you know, you don't feed people with contaminated stuff.
So let me just ask Nkiru this question. Storage is also an issue. Before it even gets into transportation, storage. So for some people, they would say because of insecurity in their area, they were not able to move the tomatoes, take for example, from Yola to Port Harcourt, and you know, but so if they have to store it, what are the things we need to take into consideration? Because there are also pesticides that are used in sending away the pests, yes, that can also be dangerous for our consumption. What do we need to know about that, and how much information is out there for the average farmer to know what to use and what not to use?
As I said, most of our products, about 60, is lost by post-harvest losses. And some of those things could have been prevented by having proper storage. And for different products, there are different storage systems. For the fresh vegetables, you're talking about cold storage. Then we'll come into power, which we don't have. The tomatoes, when you harvest tomato, you're supposed to quickly put it inside a cold room. at a certain temperature. And that is how we should be moved, not in those baskets they throw on top of each other.
By the time they get to you, they're all half
rotten. And then for the
rotten.
dry products like the legumes, like the beans, they have pesticides used. The problem is that you're supposed to use them at different times, and they're supposed to, before you sell it, most of it will have actually oxidized in the food. We overuse and we use the wrong ones. It's not that abroad they don't put pesticides, but they are pesticides that are okay for human consumption. And the mixing, the way it is applied, people adhere strictly to it. So there's a lot of information, farmer education that should go in, even for us that are growing. There are some times when you're growing vegetable, there are some pesticide you're supposed to spray at least 2 weeks before you harvest. If not, it's in the food when it's tested. Some farmers don't know, and they spray it and harvest the next day. That means you and I are consuming those pesticides. It should have already been metabolized in the vegetable before it is harvested. So that's actually where government comes in, and civil organizations to help disseminate this information to the farmer. It's not that the farmers don't want to do, but they don't know the right thing to do because nobody has told them.
And they're just one crop failure away from diving right back into poverty. So they're going to do something to save themselves.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. Now, Felicia, we have had the outbreak of Lassa fever stay with Nigeria for quite a while. And earlier in our conversation, we were talking about health. We said just in January, we had over 60 people having infected by Lassa fever in Ondo State alone. And then the border communities as well, it has spread, and we see the tens and hundreds of those numbers. Now, to what level should we have a little bit of sanity in our markets? Because after these produce have been transported, it gets to the markets. Who does the checks? Who is expected to do the checks? And how do we then nip this spread of supposedly Lassa fever, because rats or rodents will have to get to all of these grains which we purchase, and we see our market situation, it's pretty poor.
I recommend, we come up with a housekeeping plan for our markets. Food inspectors should be introduced to go regularly to see markets. Food inspectors in the past had hitherto been focused on cooked food and maybe visiting like fast food outlets where food are sold. But this is the time that we really need to put a lot of food inspectors into the market where produce are sold fresh. They're supposed to go there and educate the market women on good housekeeping. When you go into one of our markets and then in the morning, they've done their bits, they've cleaned, but still there's a smell. So the whole place needs to be turned around, and there's a lot of decongestion that needs to be done, and they need people to train them. What I realize is that most of these market women, they have old stuff, they bring in new stuff, everything goes into one store at the end of the day. And the store is infested with rats. And there's so much smell, stench, coming out from the stores where they bring out this food stuff. They bring them out in the morning, whatever they can't sell, they put back. They need to be taught the procedure of first in, first out. They need to be taught how to do proper housekeeping. I think our markets need to be disinfected. There should be deratization, there should be disinfestation regularly. And these are the things I think the government needs to put in place.
And you think it's visible at all state chapters across the country?
Yes. What's important is for the government to have, each government to have a plan. And that plan should be cascaded to the local governments. And then the state inspectors will have, a reporting chain, and then they can supervise the implementation of the plan. But we really need a housekeeping plan for our markets.
Do you think we can also replicate this at our abattoirs as well?
Oh, yes. We're talking of everywhere food is sold, because, that's where the consumers pick up the food from. So we should focus on housekeeping at the point which the food gets to the consumer. So I think it's important, and we can put a plan in place, a robust plan. Just like in factories, food factories, there is a plan for disinfestation, there is a plan for deratization, and you have to carry it out. Whether you have rats or not, there are things you need to do to keep your house in order. we should be able to, apply this policy to our markets, because that's where 80% of the population buy food from, actually. And we're taking this too lightly. They do environmental in some markets, like maybe once a week. But all they do is just sweep, tell you they're clearing gutters, which they really do not do in detail. So we need proper housekeeping plan to be in place. And if governments can do this, really, the issue of laser fever will be a thing of the past.
Let me throw this one to the House now.
Yeah.
As we're rounding up conversations, the President has already dissolved or is dissolving his cabinet and would have a new Minister of Agriculture emerge. Now, some have said, well, yes, he's a farmer, but hasn't necessarily performed optimally, looking at the different levels of assessment. Now, what exactly would you expect differently from the new Minister of Agriculture when we are talking about the competition between imported and local brands, and how effective will we see any form of ban this time around? We still see imported brands of rice across the country.
Okay, starting from me.
Yes.
Okay, well, I think personally that the importation challenges and the bans are more of they're issues that should be tackled from the federal government, as it were, not just from the Ministry of Agriculture. Because where do they come in from? They're coming from the borders. That's an activity for the customs, right?
But the production so far has not met our capacity.
Oh, yes, but we also see from the case study of rice that in 2016, the total import bill, studies have shown that the total import bill was about 744,000 metric tons. As at last year, the number that we saw officially, not counting the smallwood ones, was about 25,000 metric tons. It means that the amount of rice we imported have dropped by that number. Who produced it? It means Nigerian farmers are producing. The question is, are we producing enough for the Nigerian population? That's a different conversation. So I think that in terms of implementing the policy of ensuring that our borders are safe, we also need to put more in place to ensure that productivity level increases, post-harvest losses reduce, our farmers have more access to finance so that they can produce more, and then they are linked to superior markets.
Felicia, how do you expect the new Minister of Agriculture to ensure that at all state levels we see cooperative societies of these farmers have some structure that would make their different sectors or fields of operation more attractive, and then we can have agriculture take the main day?
Yeah, I just feel that in the agricultural plan, a lot of attention should be paid to capacity building, and capacity building should be done via clusters, and it's these clusters that grow to become cooperatives. So I think we just need to get that sector more organized, and we have a lot of database we can work with. We have agricultural offices already in all the states. So it's a matter of getting these farmers to come up based on data on the maize value chain, for you to have maybe cooperative of maize farmers, specialized cooperatives. And this has to be enabled by government, because they need to be supported to develop secretariats, develop structures to, harness all the things they require to move forward as a value chain.
And Nkiru, lastly, do you also expect an increase in budgetary allocation for agriculture from the new minister, pushing that engagement with government?
Going historically, no, I wouldn't see an increase. I wouldn't see. From what they have done over the years, I haven't seen any increase.
Well, we are speaking the language of diversification, and agriculture is supposed to take that lead.
Yes, as you said, speaking is always different from action. We haven't seen much action in agriculture. Most times government just plays lip service, comes to television, goes to the newspaper, but when you come down, I'm into background speech, I'm a farmer, so I know. that whatever they say doesn't always translate to the action. So I don't think, though they are talking about it, I don't think I'll see an increase in agricultural spending.
No optimism at all? You're not even believing that
historically
there will be a change of sorts?
They haven't won my confidence, so I'm just being pessimistic.
Okay. Well, we want to thank you all for coming. Nkiru Okparike, CEO EnviroGrow Farms. Thank you for coming. Mrs. Folunsho Olania, she's the Program Director, Agro Innovative Africa. Thank you so much for coming. And of course, Kenneth Obiajulu, he is the MD Farmgate Africa. Thank you, gentlemen and ladies. It's been an interesting conversation. Hopefully, the powers that be would be listening and would, take a leaf from these conversations and recommendations made.
Thank you very much.
Well, if you are worried about food security or you just want to share with us on agriculture in general, send us your concerns via our WhatsApp and our social media platforms. On Twitter, we are at Plus TV Africa, Instagram at Plus TV Africa, and Facebook.com/Plus TV Africa. And we are also on YouTube. If you're watching this video, please feel free to post your comments.
Most definitely, and we are wrapping up the segment. Many thanks for watching so far. I'm David Alabi.
I'm Mary Anna Cone.